Well, I'm Brooke Prentis, the Aboriginal spokesperson for Common Grace and coordinator of the Grasstree Gathering. And it's a privilege to be here, sitting and yarning with Aunty Jean Phillips, one of our great Aboriginal Christian leaders known all across Australia. So, Aunty Jean, what does this year's NAIDOC theme, Because of Her We Can, mean to you?
Thank you for this opportunity, Brooke. There are just so many Aboriginal women that have, not only have their faith stood out, but their faith has been put into action, and the tremendous contribution that they made through their faith to this nation, and particularly in the Aboriginal communities. And so many of us have benefited from those women.
And so, Aunty Jean, who were some of the Aboriginal Christian women who have inspired you?
Let me go back to Cherbourg, and that's where I originally came from. That's where I was born. And Cherbourg had the biggest Aboriginal church in this nation. And only this afternoon I was thinking of so many of the older Aboriginal women in that community. They were foundation members of the church, and through that, myself as well as so many others were taught in Sunday school, taught in Christian Endeavour, taught in the church services because of their faith. And to think of their understanding and their knowledge of God, the gospel, and the way that they just ran that church. They'd never been to high school. Well, neither did I, because we weren't allowed to go to high school at my age. And yet those women, and of course after them, many of them passed on, but then there are others who are still alive. And when I think of Cherbourg today, there's Aunty Eva, who will be 96 this year, a very godly woman. Members of her family live in Brisbane and on the Gold Coast and Stradbroke Island. And people like Aunty Ruth Hegarty and also Aunty Iris Paulson. Then there was Aunty Viola and Aunty Nellie, who did all the hospitals for 20 years on their own pension. It's hard to find anyone today to do chaplaincy in the hospitals, but those two older women did it. There was Aunty Vivian and Aunty Chrissy, who was in the AIM ministry before I even came in. And there was Aunty Hoya, who did the ministry here in Brisbane before I ever came to Brisbane. And Aunty Evie, who ran so many youth camps, and that's where Glennie and others became involved with her. These are women who did all of these wonderful things, no government money, but somehow the Lord provided for them, or they raised their own money, and they were there reaching out to children and to youth and to young people. And Aunty Hoya's mother was one of the leaders of the Cherbourg church. She was like the pastor. It's interesting, a lot of pastors today, even in our communities as well as in them, who don't want to acknowledge women. Well, it was the women in the church at Cherbourg were the foundation members and ran that church like anyone ran it. So women have played a big part, well, especially in my life. But then when I became a missionary with the AIM, I met so many wonderful Aboriginal Christian women, like the Grants, Aunty Flo Grant, and her parents, or her mother, and her sisters. And then there was all the Naden family, so many families like that. There was Aunty Erica Kyle there on Palm Island, whose grandfather was the first Aboriginal pastor. And it was such a privilege and a joy to be involved with all of these women. And I tell you, they were not only great Christians, but they knew what it was to support God and God's work. I think those things have really made an impact upon my life.
And I think for me, Aunty Jean, one of the gifts, or some of the gifts that we have to give as Aboriginal Christians, is that recognition of those that have gone before us, and the repeating of those stories and passing that down to the next generation. That beautiful example of Aboriginal culture that we display within a Christian context as well.
Yeah, well, I think that these things, we need other people out there, and I want to put an appeal, to be able to help us to do all of this, Brooke. You can't do it all, I can't do it all, but we need other people, and there are many non-Aboriginal people out there who, as Christians I'm talking about, say, well, what can I do? We want them to come on board with us. But there's all those young women that has been involved with me over the years, but there are other younger women coming on board too, and with their gifts, they can help us to write up some of these things, or we can do some of those stories on the video like we're doing tonight about these older folk. And it's all part of not only the history of Australia, it's part of our history. You know, so many of these godly people around. And, you know, we mustn't forget people like Ravina from the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry here in Brisbane, and Aunty Alex, what they're all doing, what you're doing. Glennie Naden down there in Coff Saba, who ran camps for 30 years. And no money from the government. But, you know, these are younger women who've been doing things like with Grasstree, and we want to support them or move ahead with those. We just want more people to come on board and to be able to do a real witness here in this country, and we can say to the rest of Australia, look, this is what God's doing, and it's wonderful in our sight, and we're all journeying together. We're going to make a difference. Australia needs all of us, no matter what race we come from. If we belong to Him, we've got to make a contribution in this country to make a difference. Get rid of racism, get rid of ignorance, you know, and this could happen.
And Aunty Jean, do you have some words of encouragement for our Aboriginal Christian women in ministry?
Yeah, well, just to keep your eyes upon the Lord. Remember, He's called you, and it's a tremendous calling. It's a high and a holy calling. And just keep your eyes upon Him and trusting in Him and praying. And I'm hoping that we'll be there to be able to support you wherever we can. We know it's not easy out there, but He is there. God will never leave you. And Brooke, I want to thank all of those non-Aboriginal people out there. Some of them are outside the church, but many of them inside the church who have come on the journey with us. And I want to thank you. And I want to encourage you to come on the journey, that we're journeying together. And that can be a real witness in this nation. Thank you for your thoughts, your prayers. Those of you who faithfully give, we just thank the Lord for it all, because it's Him. You know, we're all one in Christ Jesus, we are, and we want to put that into practice.
So I want to just say a big thank you to Aunty Jean Phillips, who shared with us this NAIDOC Week 2018. Because of her, we can. Aunty Jean, you're a huge inspiration to me. You've taught me so much about how to follow Jesus and how to try and change hearts and minds and bring people on the journey with us, how to support our community and how to lead this nation. And so I thank you for all that you have given to me personally, and we thank you for sharing with Common Grace, and we thank you for your vision of the Grasstree Gathering.
Thank you, Brooke, for giving me this opportunity and the special time of NAIDOC because of the women. And we thank God for all of our women.